So, Michael, you call this a saga of self-invention and raw ambition, clashing egos, and ruthless pursuit of excellence. This sounds exactly like how I program my Netflix algorithm, so I am definitely in. And I wondered if you could just read a little bit of the beginning of the book, just like there to there.
Sure.
Just there.
For decades, one company in Manhattan told the world what to buy, what to value, what to wear, what to eat, even what to think. Before Instagram, before TikTok, there was the Condé Nast publications, merchant of fantasies and supreme arbiter of sophistication. Vogue chose the designers whose clothes would be worn by millions around the world and the models who became global icons of sex and femininity. Vanity Fair determined which moguls we envied and movie stars we worshipped. GQ made it okay for straight guys to care about clothes. Architectural Digest pioneered real estate porn, and The New Yorker elevated tabloid fare like the O.J. Simpson murder trial to the realm of serious journalism. Our contemporary Instagram culture, airbrushed, brand name laden, and full of FOMO, where pretty people do pretty things in pretty places without you, is a DIY replication of the universe that the celebrity editors of Condé Nast carefully created month after month, year after year. At the peak of its powers, Condé Nast cultivated a mystique that captivated tens of millions of subscribers across 4 continents with brands that became international symbols of class and glamour. Editors such as Tina Brown and Anna Wintour were venerated, celebrated, and feared with unrivaled sway in determining who and what was elite, who was in, and who was out. Their magazines were glossy manuals to the good life, defining our modern notions of class, consumerism, politics, lifestyle, and taste. To be featured by Condé Nast meant that one had arrived as an actor, author, designer, thinker, or socialite. Condé Nast, even the name announced itself with a continental flair, that exotic accent above the E so redolent of fine living and superior judgment. Never before had so much cultural influence been concentrated under one roof, and it will never happen again.
So, Anna, before we delve into the history of Condé Nast in your very delicious book, a world you describe as simultaneously dysfunctional and successful, a world where editors became as famous as the celebrities on their covers, a world where a job aspirant might lose a job if she ate asparagus with a fork instead of her fingers, the European way. Let's talk about the news of the moment. The very glamorous Redica Jones has left her job as editor of Vanity Fair, and she is being replaced by the very glamorous Mark Guiducci. Anna has stepped away from Vogue, but not really. The chiffon trenches are shrinking and shivering, shivs everywhere. So what's happening? And also, if you have any dish about the Devil Wears Prada sequel, which is about Miranda Priestly dealing with the decline of print media and is soon to start filming, please clue us in. You say The Devil Wears Prada got right about Condé Nast, the anxiety and ambition, self-discipline and self-regard, seriousness about silly things, and silliness about serious things.
Well, I first want to thank Anna Wintour for her generosity in making this announcement 2 weeks before my book came on the market, which was just very thoughtful of her. I know that her entire staff was stunned when she made this announcement that she was yielding the title of editor-in-chief of American Vogue, which she'd held since 1988. They were called into an unannounced meeting and jaws dropped around the room. Anna was quick to remind us all that she's not going anywhere. She's still the chief content officer of Condé Nast. I do think, though, that it was the really first concrete sign that succession is in the air over there, and perhaps an acknowledgement that Vogue, which still remains this internationally recognized brand and is still recognized around the world, it needs to transition into this post-print era that we're all stumbling our way into. And Anna had said that she's looking for a new editor with newly creative ideas about how to channel the values of this magazine and this institution into the internet and social media and sort of our digital world. But it does feel like a real transitional moment. And it's interesting that The Devil Wears Prada 2, which is filming, and a small New York Times tidbit about that is that the director, David Frankel, is the son of Max Frankel, who was the executive editor of the Times and recently passed away.
But is it the same writer?
It is, yes, it's the same screenwriter as well.
Because she did a great job.
I agree. I love that film. I always say I think it's one of the best films ever made about work and ambition in the office.
And everybody still looks the same, basically, amazingly, yeah.
But apparently it's going to be about Miranda Priestley, who's the character that Meryl Streep plays, sort of based on Anna Wintour. She's going to be suffering her way through the digital revolution, which sounds a little less fun than the first film. So
yes.
We'll see how it pans out.
Well, everything is a little less fun right now. Except for crying in an office meeting when Trump won, you don't really get into the private side of Anna, which, of course, we're all curious about. Did you learn anything surprising? Is her house really messy? Does she play Candy Crush?
I think what was striking to me was, I think Anna has sort of evanesced from an individual into an institution herself. But, actually, when you look back at her early life, when she was in her 20s, I mean, she was a striver. She had come over to New York from London because she was passed over for a big editing job. She got hired at Harper's Bazaar, and she was fired after 9 months. And her editor said to her, "You'll never understand the American fashion market." Then she went to work at what was kind of softcore porn's not quite right, but it was sort of a women's erotic magazine called Viva. I mean, she really sort of had a difficult period before she found her groove. And I think it's interesting just to imagine Anna Wintour as someone who is still really trying to make her mark, make her reputation. And I hope that the book offers, I guess, a little more insight into her as a young woman on the make than you would otherwise see today.
Yeah, it's interesting that she had that kind of shaky beginning because she always seems so confident and poised. You never see that side.
I'd also contrast it with Tina Brown, who I'm sure we'll get to, but Tina Brown was another super talented English editor, but she was a bit younger than Anna, and she was incredibly successful from almost the time she was 19 years old. She was winning prizes for plays. She took over Tatler magazine when she was 23. And so even though the two of them sort of came to Condé Nast in the 1980s and revolutionized, as I argue in the book, I mean, really American magazine journalism, Tina was always sort of a soaring star from the start, and I think Anna often felt very self-conscious about that because she had really grinded her way to win.
You talk about them a couple times. They seem to get along, but how did they get along?
Well,
because as you know, I interviewed Graydon Carter for his memoir, and he had an absolutely scorching 5 pages about his criticisms of the two of them in regard to him.
Yes, and in fact, there's some dispute. Tina and Graydon have a bit of a dispute over who was asked to take over the New Yorker back in, I mean, some of these.
He claimed he was offered the New Yorker before her, and then Sy took it away and gave it to her.
Maureen, you actually scooped me on that because I had that.
I had
that in my book. I was
very great scooping you.
I mean, I can't compete. So I do think they did.
But I think it was more like when the part that is interesting is when they started together at Condé Nast, they would have these cozy conspiratorial dinners.
Yeah.
And then as she got higher, you used the word, but I don't know if I'll pronounce it wrong. How do you say foie dur? My French teacher fired me, literally. So,
yeah.
And I think he missed that side of her. And then, of course, she took away his
his budget.
support staff but that came from Psy, right, where everyone's had to be taken away.
So it's worth thinking back to the late 80s. So Graydon Carter makes his name at Spy magazine, which is this incredibly brilliant, inventive, but also scathing magazine about skewering the power elite of Manhattan. They routinely called Barry Diller buck-toothed, I think was the phrase they applied to him.
And that's where Graydon came up with the formulation of Donald Trump, famous real estate builder, as a short-fingered vulgarian. And he had interviewed him for GQ, and he just noticed, like, his fingers were short. And that is still, to this day, in the, bloodstream.
It's still in his head, the Trump's
Yeah,
head
it's
as well.
still in Trump's
He
head.
doesn't seem to have
And
forgotten
what
it.
Trump would do to me and Graydon and anyone was he'd print out what you wrote and then write on it with a black or gold Sharpie, and then so he wrote Graydon with a picture of his hands and said, "Not that short."
So Graydon was kind of this black enfant terrible of the media class, and Anna Wintour, who's the editor of Vogue, hires him as a contributing writer. And conspicuously, Spy magazine in that era did not go after Anna Wintour, did not really go after Si Newhouse of Condé Nast either. So it was actually a brilliant move of corporate jujitsu on Anna's part, because first she brought in an extremely talented editor into the organization, but she also showed Si that she could neutralize a threat. And I think Graydon felt that they were sort of cozy, and I think they were very friendly for a while, but as they both rose to have their fiefdoms in Condé Nast, the competition between them won out.
So I interviewed a few years ago the former editor of British Vogue, Edward Enninful. When his memoir came out, he had some criticisms of Vogue about race, as did my late friend, Andre Leontali, creating a world, designed for thin white women, which Anna later apologized for. And at that time, Enninful was kind of seen as the heir apparent, I think, but then he left the Empire. You don't know what happened there, do you?
Well,
I felt like he was trying to get on his job, and that wasn't going to happen, I guess.
Well, reports differ.
Yeah.
I mean, Edward Enninful was a hugely successful editor of British Vogue, and a lot of people thought he was the heir apparent for Anna. All of a sudden, he was moving into some, sidelined position and kind of transitioning out of the company. I did speak with a member of the Conde board who told me that there was some concern about that when it happened, because you're looking at a company now, and we were talking about Condé Nast today. I mean, Anna Wintour, we should say David Remnick is still there as the editor-in-chief of the New Yorker, and very successful there. But Anna is sort of the most powerful person at the company, and I think that the board members are thinking, well, when she leaves, what is our future? And some people felt that Enninful should have come in, because that would have been a smart moment to make the transition. Anna won out, as she seems to always have done for the last 42 years that she's been at Condé Nast. And so Edward's off to greener pastures, I suppose.
So you call Anna and Tina, not Wintour and Brown. Does that imply a certain admiration for these Valkyries? Or do you just think of them as the Cher and Beyonce of the magazine world?
I think yes, a little more like that. I was thinking, I wanted to sort of capture the idea that there was a time when these, again, magazine editors, which is so funny to think about today, but they were so famous in their world that they were, mononymed. I mean, it was like Prince or Sting, you say Anna, even today, people know who you're talking about. So I think that was the same with Si and Graydon, who were other characters who I referred to by the first name, yeah.
Coming back to Anna and Tina, you did have a disagreement they had. They had a private lunch with Princess Diana that was supposed to be off the record, and Tina put on the record. And that wasn't the first time Tina did that. Didn't she kind of get famous by putting something off the record on the record?
Yes, early on,
Yeah.
She went to Private Eye, is this famed weekly paper in London that is sort of a press review, and they have these famous weekly lunches that are, I'm going to mess up the British terminology, but they're off the record, and Tina wrote it all up. And I think she was like an Oxford undergraduate, and it helped make her name.
And did they have words about that, or Anna was just annoyed?
Oh, Anna was not thrilled about this.
Because Princess Diana was trashing Charles, right?
That and actually, I don't think this is in the book, but Princess Diana did have nice things to say about Prince Andrew at the time. Of course, none of us would have known. But of course, just to Tina ran that story in the wake of Diana's sudden death. She wrote her comment. The start of Talk of the Town that week was recounting this. I think Anna felt that was a violation.
Yeah. Well, Tina has more Fleet Street sensibilities, I think.
She does, but actually, both Tina and Anna actually have a real newswoman's blood in them, which I think tells us actually a bit about how Condé Nast was staying. It was so cutting edge in a lot of ways in the 80s and 90s. Anna's father was the longtime editor of the Evening Standard in London, so she grew up in a newspaper family. And by the way, she still chases scoops. Now, I know a lot of people tittered about Vogue having the Lauren Sanchez, dress photos from the wedding. Mm-hmm. But I know that Anna chased that, and that got huge attention all over the world, that Vogue had the exclusive of what she was wearing. And again, I know it's a bit frivolous, but of course it's a society wedding of the year. And in funny ways, I think Anna applies that newshound attitude toward the scoops, as it were, of her universe. Yeah. Oh.
So basically, both of them thrive by introducing a high-low sensibility. Tina once said, "Our job is to make the sexy serious and the serious sexy."
Yes, words she uttered to an editor of hers named David Kuhn, who worked with her very closely. High-low, this is such a central part of the Conde DNA, and it actually talks a lot about kind of what was happening in the culture in the 1980s. One thing, let's just go back and say, so Condé Nast, the company, dates back to 1909. Vogue comes out of Mrs. Astor's 400. There's sort of these deep society roots to it. But up through the 70s, Condé Nast was like a third-tier magazine publisher. There was Time and Life, there was Hearst, and then there was Condé Nast, which had Vogue, of course, always important to the fashion set, but not so much of a mass audience. And Si Newhouse, who had inherited the company from his father in 1979, really meticulously kind of built it up into what it became. He acquired GQ magazine, Gourmet, Architectural Digest. He restarted Vanity Fair. And so kind of the modern Condé Nast, the go-go global behemoth that we came to know, really comes about in the 1980s.
You wrote, these days, TikTok and Instagram serve up a similar cultural stew, a model in a bikini, followed by an exegesis on the Israel-Palestine conflict, followed by Kim Kardashian promoting a Skims collection. In 1984, this blend was virtually unheard of.
It's true. What Tina Brown did at Vanity Fair was bring deeply reported political profiles mixed in with these splashy celebrity pieces and grisly true crime tales or aristocrats behaving badly. These magazines were aimed at this upper class and kind of upper middle class. I think I called it in the book like the rich and those who aspired to be rich. What she was doing was kind of giving permission for that middle-brow audience to indulge in subjects that were otherwise seen as déclassé. The New Yorker, I think that readers of the New Yorker weren't expecting sort of, I don't know, like a fight over inheritance among, European minor royals. But Tina would apply smart. She'd send a super smart reporter to write about it, and it was delicious. It was so fun to read, and she was sort of making it okay for a certain class of readers to indulge in those topics.
Although Si's daughter complained that Tina made it a soft porn magazine.
I think that was Si's daughter who was concerned that it had gotten a little too, and of course Tina Brown's Vanity Fair was widely criticized. I don't want to jump ahead, but should we talk about the Demi Moore cover?
Oh, sure.
Annie Leibovitz shooting Demi Moore nude with her pregnant belly was probably the most famous Vanity Fair cover, maybe one of the most famous magazine covers of the 20th century. And it's kind of amazing, like I was going back and reading all the, reaction to it, and it was like, it was explosion. I mean, it was covered on every major network newscast. A lot of newsstands covered it in a paper bag. It was sort of seen as contraband. And it was so interesting because there were some critics who said, well, it's a triumph for feminism because it's, sort of pregnancy isn't something that should be covered up. And here we are celebrating this sort of sensual depiction of pregnancy.
Yeah, everyone was stunned that her ankles weren't swollen.
And it was also, by the way, crassly commercial. What a great way to sell magazines. It was one of the highest selling issues. And I kind of thought that captured in some ways the Condé Nast mix. I mean, was it a little cynical? Was it a bit of a publicity stunt? Absolutely. It was also a naked movie star on the cover. But it also kind of really resonated at that moment in the culture. And Demi Moore talks often about it as feeling that she really struck a blow for, I guess, taking pregnancy out of sort of
yeah, that you could be pregnant and sexy.
Yeah.
I think that's true. You said Tina surfed the naked aspirations of yuppies in the 80s. As Fran Lebowitz noted, it was the first time in my life that people who had money talked about money all the time. You described Tina's formula as celebrity, titillation, money, and like bitters added to a cocktail, an invigorating dash of bad taste. She wanted hot, hot, hot. She used to, with my friends who wrote for her, her highest praise would be V period hot, like very hot, she'd write them. And also, no, go ahead.
She was very concerned about what you thought of her.
Me?
She would occasionally send memos, Tina, to her Vanity Fair colleagues, and she'd be reading Maureen's writing, and she would say, well, what is the Dowd going to think about this?
The Dowd, I love that. Yeah, Tina,
I'm going to bring that back.
Yeah, I just have to say, as someone who came in the similar time period in a different evil empire, like Time magazine. I was at Time magazine. These women, Tina and Anna, are amazing. What they accomplished is incredible. I mean, if you knew what it was like for women in media then. And as you point out, all the executives were men. Like it was okay for the women to be editors, but the executives still were men.
It was the case, and they often wouldn't sort of tell the female editors. So they used to keep the budgets under wraps. So there's a story about when Grace Mirabella was the editor of Vogue, her deputy got called in. They said, you've overspent your budget on photos this year. And the deputy said, I'm so sorry. Well, how are we going to right-size this? Well, she didn't say right-size because I don't think that term existed back then. But how will we fix this? And he said, oh, you ladies, you don't have to think about the numbers. Just go back. They wouldn't. But it was, in a lot of ways, a very progressive place for women at that time. And I should add, too, it was a progressive place for gay men. It was one of the few kind of big companies in Manhattan where openly gay men could be successful, be open about their identity. I mean, that was not the case at banks and law firms at the time.
Before we left the high-low thing, I do kind of wince sometimes at how much Vogue has become a showcase for the Kardashians. Because I just wish there were one place I could go where I didn't have to read about the Kardashians all the time. All the time.
I'll say there's an interesting pattern, and I found this because I interviewed more than 200 people for the book, and I spoke to editors from all these different eras of Condé Nast, and you sort of see a progression where every few years there are editors who say, well, the place has gone to shit, And, it's embraced tawdriness and vulgarity. And Richard Avedon quit in a huff in 1988 when Anna Wintour put a woman in jeans on the cover of the magazine. And he denounced Anna at Diana Vreeland's memorial service. So, there were sort of these dramatic breaks, throughout. But yes, we now have Kardashians on the cover. So.
Well, okay, there's so many things we have to get to. So, I have like 100 pages here. So I'm just going to jump ahead and say one of the most hilarious parts of the book is when Cy decides he wants to buy the New Yorker. And he thinks it's the most amazing thing. And they act like a flasher has broken into Queen Elizabeth's drawing room. They are so shocked and upset by this. So can you describe a little of that?
Yes, so the New Yorker, of course, this literary treasure by 1986 was a bit moribund. It was starting to, its profit margins were getting smaller and smaller, and in a lot of ways, they had, of course, brilliant writers, but it was less in the mix, as Tina might say. And
it was not the hot.
So Si Newhouse, this proprietor of a women's magazine empire, comes in with his millions of dollars and gobbles it up. And it was front page news in the New York Times, and it was seen as an act of literary vandalism that, that he was taking it over. And Lillian Ross, who was William Shawn's mistress, was very upset about this. She referred to Cy as a ravenous Jew in the country club.
Yeah, I was looking for that quote.
Yeah,
and she's Jewish, and Walter Shawn was William Shawn.
They both were sort of secular Jews. It kind of speaks to the class dynamics at that time, because Cy Newhouse is the son of a very rich man. His father was this newspaper magnate, but his father was self-made. He was the son of Russian immigrants, and so Cy grew up with money, but he was very awkward, and he didn't fit in with sort of the WASP establishment of the mid-century of New York, and so he had a bit of this looking through the mirror aspect as well. And I think that maybe the New Yorker people didn't quite realize that Cy cared a lot about art, cared a lot about culture. He was a great collector of art. He loved the great Russian novels when he was a teenager.
These people were in a different century. Shawn was so fussy that he insisted a writer change the word pissoir for public urinal to a circular curbside construction. And so once Cy bought it, Lillian Ross wanted all the employees to greet their new employer by yelling, "Shame, shame," like in Game of Thrones. That was crazy. William Shawn, I have the privilege of being someone who William Shawn yelled at once. When I was a Times Metro reporter, I had to do a story about this New Yorker writer called Alistair Reid, who he made up characters and changed settings and put a lot of fiction into his New Yorker nonfiction. And I had to call William Shawn and ask him about it. And he just began yelling at me and telling me that sometimes truth had to go beyond the facts. And I'm like, what about that vaunted fact-checking section of yours? But the woman who broke that story was Joanne Littman in the Wall Street Journal, who later went on to run a short-lived Condé Nast magazine called Portfolio, which brings us to expense accounts. So we have to go over this because I was just at the end of these crazy expense accounts when I worked at Time. And the expense accounts, if you only had the expense account stuff, I would buy this book for everyone I know because it is just unbelievable. But tell some of one of them involves this editor, Joanne Littman, who was running a business magazine, and they wanted to have a picture of an elephant in the room. So instead of just photoshopping it, they imported an elephant and brought him into an office at incredible cost.
The elephant shoot, by the way, took place 2 weeks before Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. So the timing couldn't have been better. Now wait, did you have the prime rib trolley come at Time magazine? Were you there when they would bring it around on close nights?
Yes, I was there for that.
I've always.
But what I was not in on, which every time I talked to Graydon Carter in the south of France, I'm sorry I wasn't in on this, was Condé Nast. They would like give low interest mortgages and
Yes,
cars.
that's right. That's
it was
right.
like being on Oprah. Come down and take a car.
I mean, just for illustration, I think it was about 5 years ago when the New York Times started giving us free coffee in the office.
Yeah.
So
We don't get free stuff, unfortunately.
But yes, so I mean, this world of expenses feels like a fantasy land now. But the low interest, no interest mortgages were probably the most distinctive part of this, where if you were Graydon Carter, you needed to entertain in style in a manner befitting the editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair, and so Si Newhouse would essentially pay the mortgage, he'd pay the down payment on a West Village townhouse, and they would, cover it. And I believe, in some cases, when editors departed, Condé Nast would just forgive the loan, and so part of their exit package was a townhouse.
Basically, because size Condé Nast, it wasn't even interested in. You said they didn't even have an internal budget.
Yes.
It wasn't that he wasn't that interested in making money, right?
Yeah, well, there was a philosophy there that waste was important to creativity, and this kind of dates back.
Because they would call Katrina Herron, the head of.
Yeah. She was Wired, yeah.
Yeah, Wired, when they bought Wired. And they told her they didn't like that she was staying in was it a Radisson?
Yeah.
They wanted her to go to the Ritz, and they wanted her to take her clothing allowance. She didn't want that.
She had come to New York to meet with advertisers, and she thought she saved them money. She booked a 3-star hotel in Midtown, and she was called in and scolded and said, "You need to take a suite at the St. Regis."
Yeah, she was scolded.
Your advertisers need to know that you're staying at the St. Regis. And this speaks to, Hearst used to call Conde our irrational competitor, because, but there was this internal logic to it, and to Si it made sense. It was that, I call these editors influencers before influencers, and their lives were a top to bottom marketing campaign for Condé Nast. So to live the life of great glamour, to have 24-hour limousine service, to jet on the Concorde to the Paris fashion shows, it was all to project, it was all about creating a mystique. And that mystique was what really set Condé Nast apart. It's why readers wanted to subscribe, to own, to borrow a piece of that fantasy world. It's why advertisers paid to get their products in there. It was all about kind of creating this American fantasy, this fantasy of aspiration. And I think that's one of Condé Nast's kind of profound contributions.
And they, Graydon got into this after a while, because tell the briefcase story.
Well, Graydon, who actually was a
Graydon has enormous flair. He's like someone walked out of the screen of a black and white 30s movie.
And Graydon was very nervous when he took over Vanity Fair.
Yeah, he was scared because he was. Oh, you have a great paragraph in here about the whole thing was strivers, starting with Condé Nast himself and Si and Graydon, who maybe weren't born to the manor, but
Condé Nast himself was a middle-class boy from St. Louis, and he had a very fancy name, and he let people think he was related to Thomas Nast, the political cartoonist, but it was all. So Graydon, who was very neurotic and anxious when he first began, kind of became a little more comfortable with the trappings of an editorship. And so he had 3 assistants, I think. And have you ever seen the movie The Best of Everything? That was kind of the aesthetic of his office, this mid-century, just gorgeous. You were probably there a few times. And he would smoke his cigarettes. Even after the indoor smoking ban had come in, he would have a Camel Light burning on his lips. But so when he would come to work in the morning, his assistant would be called and would come down the elevator and meet his car and pick up his briefcase from the back seat so that Graydon could stride into the building, his hands free. The other thing I love, I'll just say quickly, is that, and people who worked at Tina's Vanity Fair will remember this, but when writers went on business trips or on assignment, they could FedEx their luggage ahead of them to their hotel, so they didn't have the indignity of carrying it on the plane. So I'm going to try to expense that next week at the Times and see,
Yeah, good luck.
see if they'll get away with it.
So we have to talk about, there are two more things we have to talk about right away, so I hope they're not going to yank me yet. We have to talk about Graydon's Hollywood Vanity Fair party.
Yes.
And he had the motto, it's not who you invite, it's who you don't invite. And I can best explain the terror of this party with a story of my own experience, which is, even though I started with Graydon at time, we worked together when we were really young, he'd only invite me sporadically and occasionally, and I was given no +1. So back in the West Wing days, I was dating Aaron Sorkin, and I asked them if I could bring Aaron Sorkin. They literally took 2 weeks to think about whether Aaron Sorkin was good enough to come with me. So then finally they called and they said, okay, he can come with you. But then the next year, they took me off the invitation list and left Aaron Sorkin. So that's what it was like with Graydon. It was this reign of terror, party terror. But you have some hilarious stories that weren't even in Graydon's own memoir about how people tried to sneak in.
Oh yes, there was a gentleman who one year, he was an aspiring actor, so he goes to LA, he buys an old Oscar statuette from a pawn shop, and the rule with the VF Oscar, the Vanity Fair Oscar party, is that if you've won an Oscar that night, no matter for what category, you can walk right in. So he got the Oscar, he put a best sound editing placard on the front, and he hired a white limousine to drop him off outside on the red carpet, and he just, waltzed his way in. And Graydon later heard this story, and he called him up and he said, that's so creative, I'm just gonna invite you to this party.
That's great. Now, we have to talk about how Condé Nast created Donald Trump. Yeah. I didn't even know all of this story.
It's an amazing, so it actually all starts, Graydon, who of course he and Trump have had this rivalry that has lasted for decades. It all starts with a story that Graydon wrote about Donald Trump in 1984. It was a cover story for GQ magazine. It sold so well that Si Newhouse, who had also recently bought Random House, the book publisher, he noticed the newsstand sales and he said, we have to get this guy a book. And it was Si's idea that Trump write a book called The Art of the Deal. The other connection to this is that Si Newhouse's closest friend from the time he was a young boy was Roy Cohn. They carpooled together to
Now
Horace
you see
Mann.
the conspiracy forming.
This is a real story of Manhattan lore. Si and Roy were best friends in high school. They carpooled together up to the Bronx. I think Si helped Roy run some of his student council campaigns back then. And when Roy was on trial for corruption charges, Si Newhouse stood in the courtroom every single day to support him. It's an incredible. But I do think there was a bit of a hidden hand here because Roy would have introduced Si to Donald at some point, maybe at a Studio 54 birthday party. The Newhouses, I think, they've told me, look, they had no idea that what would happen would happen. But throughout the years, Vogue and Vanity Fair would feature Donald Trump. 2 of his wives have been on the cover.
Yeah, well, this is something we have to get to, too, because so Melania and Donald, Melania was on the cover when she was engaged to Donald, right? And then when they got married, Vogue was putting them on the cover, so Anna assigned Andre Leontali to go to Paris and go shopping for wedding dresses with her. So since he was my friend, he told me everything, which I'm now going to tell you, which is she was very nice to the couturiers there. And he said he saw her trying on all these dresses, so he saw her in her all together, and that she was the best moisturized woman he had ever known. So that's a hidden secret about Melania. But then Melania, well, now Melania has not been on the cover as First Lady, and Hillary was on twice, and Kamala was on.
And I see it, by the way, in MAGA media. They still gripe about this.
Yeah, and Donald said, it's sad.
And apparently, the story goes that Anna actually, after Trump became president the first time, she offered to do some sort of shoot with Melania, but would not guarantee the cover. And they said no.
Oh, right.
That was seen as a slight.
But she did have to go and sort of grovel to Trump. In one of these editor's notes when they were engaged or getting married, she called Donald like kind-hearted.
Oh, Anna did.
Yeah, Anna, kind-hearted. And
yes, you sort of see this sycophancy that, was true in a lot of our mass media, right? I mean, this was The Apprentice and NBC. I mean, Condé Nast is just one of these institutions that, in many ways, propped up Donald Trump's. Right.
But then
she's now said that Donald is banned from the Met Gala. Which I
but
feel like in Anna world is like the
where
ultimate.
he proposed to Melania. So again, a conspiracy. Right. Like all of these ties come together. But she did the first political endorsement in Vogue history endorsing Hillary.
Yes.
So then when Trump was elected, she had to sneak in the vector of Trump Tower and kind of grovel to him.
I would add.
And then she had to ask Graydon, who had this incredibly also sometimes groveling, sometimes cutting relationship with Trump, to come to a summit meeting.
Well, it's amazing. So after Trump was elected, so many people came to meet him at Trump Tower. There were only 2 media outlets that Trump deigned to go to himself in person. One was the New York Times. We were there when he came to meet with editors and reporters.
He called us the jewel of the world, not the enemy of the people.
I keep that written on my corkboard on my desk. But he then also went to Condé Nast, and he met with all the editors-in-chief of Condé Nast. It was like 2 weeks before he got inaugurated. And it's because Condé Nast, in so many ways, symbolized the Manhattan elite, the Manhattan establishment that for his entire life he had yearned to join. It still meant so much to him back then that he was willing to go meet with them. So at Anna's invitation. That's how that happened.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating part of the book too. But the book is about, the social media was like a French Revolution, so they overthrew all the Marie Antoinettes, and they don't want gatekeepers and voice of God. But honestly, I like gatekeepers, not only at the Times, but I like them everywhere, because if I go on TikTok, so I go on TikTok, and it tells me to use beef tallow on my face, which I do, and I break out, and I have an expensive dermatologist bill. Whereas when you counted on Anna at Vogue, you wouldn't get that kind of BS beauty advice.
The same thing happened to me with the beef tallow, too. So. Look, media institutions, like all institutions, were flawed, and I think the book is a warts and all portrait of it. But I do think we have such a chaotic media landscape today. I mean, it's like an ADHD kind of, you're bombarded all day with push alerts and news from all different social media channels. It's so difficult to sift through it, to understand the hierarchy of what matters and what doesn't. I think that's because we're missing the gatekeepers.
I miss them, definitely.
And it's become a dirty word. I mean, people sort of cringe at that word, but it's almost more like curators, or it's expertise in a way. I mean, it's something that I still think has a real value today.
So there's one question about, what do you think Vogue needs to stay relevant in this day and age, which brings us to the part, I was just reading this through my hands because it was so painful, the part of the book where Si Newhouse misses chance after chance to get in on the digital revolution. And, he had one editor, Deborah Needleman, a very talented editor, who could have come up with, or did come up with Pinterest before Pinterest.
Yeah.
And didn't Linda Wells come up with something?
Yes, at Allure, and Deborah Needleman, who ran Domino, which was a beloved decorating magazine, she said she could not get funding for this Pinterest idea she had. I mean, she would go to the editors and the executives, and they would just ignore her. And this happened again and again. Actually, Vogue, which is like one of the best-known brands in the world, their website was style.com because Si Newhouse thought if it was vogue.com, it would cannibalize the print product.
Yeah, and he wouldn't let Gourmet use Gourmet either, right?
And he wouldn't let them use
They wanted to put up recipes,
Yeah.
which is part of what saved the New York Times.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And Ruth Reichel writes about that so eloquently in her.
But it's so sad. It's like watching the Titanic when the stupid captain.
It's like kind of turning toward it and you can't
Yeah.
do anything. There's a great line, Alexander Lieberman, who we haven't talked about, but is this kind of figure of great panache, who was the creative director. He, in the 90s, somebody was trying to teach him how to use a computer, and he just he said, computers, it's just a phase.
Yeah. So here's another audience question. The Newhouses recently sold their stake in Warner Brothers Disney. What would make them sell Condé Nast?
That's a good question. So the Newhouse family writ large, I should say, Condé Nast has had financial problems. The family itself has these extremely lucrative investments in cable television conglomerates and Warner Brothers Discovery, the entertainment studio. They did just sell a big stake of that, which it was sort of suggested to me that was a bit of lack of confidence in the days of David Zaslav, the chief executive. But would they sell Condé Nast? Condé Nast is the heirloom for the Newhouses. I think they would never sell the New Yorker. I think Vogue and Vanity Fair are not going anywhere right now. There are a lot of rumors that Jeff Bezos traded Vogue for his Lauren's wedding photos or something like that. That was in the Daily Mail, so it's probably half true. But I don't think that's going to happen right now. I could see them selling off some smaller assets, though. And I'll just say quickly that Si Newhouse's brother Donald is still in his late 90s, in very good health as far as I know. I do think after he dies, the descendants might be more willing to part with these assets because I think they would see it as a sign of disrespect to Si to get rid of it right now.
So, coming back to the gatekeeper thing, the same is true of Hollywood. They got rid of all the old tyrant moguls running studios, and those guys could be awful in some ways, but now there are no good movies. It's like, don't sacred monsters in the media in Hollywood make better art than TikTok?
I won't disagree with this. And by the way, I'm glad you brought up Hollywood because I think that one of the best metaphors for Condé Nast is it was so much like the great Hollywood studios of the 1930s, which, by the way, were founded by these Jewish outsiders who had to go across the country to sort of create their industry. And they created the most exquisite visions of wasp resplendence that they then beamed out to the rest of the country. And they sort of created this fantasy of like kind of the high life, sort of an American high life, particularly during the 30s, during the Depression. And Si Newhouse was a great movie buff. He used to screen old black and white films in his very sizable apartment. He once said that if he wasn't a magazine publisher, he would have been a film director. And I always thought that was so fascinating because the experience of reading a magazine is a little bit like watching a film. Every frame of it is determined for you by an unseen hand. And he loved that.
Well, Si Newhouse what was he? He was 5'3" and very shy.
He wore a ratty New Yorker sweatshirt every day to the office. Yeah.
And he loved living vicariously through these larger-than-life editors.
That's right.
Which, once they realized that, they got even more larger-than-life.
Yes.
Tell this story about when Graydon did the Annie Leibovitz cover for $500,000.
Oh, right. So, I mean, you might remember Vanity Fair had these incredible fold-out covers with like 10 of the biggest movie stars in the world all lined up. And so one year, Annie Leibovitz, they built a set that was based on Carolina Herrera's Upper East Side of townhouse. There was literally a John Singer Sargent, like an actual John Singer Sargent painting they had rented for the shoot. But in order to get all the celebrities, she had to fly the set from LA to New York to London. Graydon said the expenses were like Vietnam. That was his closest comparison. So one day he had to tell Si Newhouse, he sat down with him at lunch and he said, I have good news and I have bad news. And so I said, well, tell me the bad news. And Graydon said, well, we've shot a $475,000 cover, which, by the way, is about $1 million today with inflation. Si sits there for a moment. He says, well, what's the good news? Graydon says, well, it looks like a $475,000 cover. Si signed off. He was fine with it.
Well, that's Alex Lieberman, this great character who was also a striver, right?
Yeah, he was. Well, he was a white Russian, and his family were refugees from the Bolsheviks, and he was from an educated family, but they lost everything, and he kind of climbed his way back into New York. Yeah.
Yeah, when he helped fire Diana Vreeland, she had that great line.
Oh, right.
Said, yeah, she said, "I've seen Black Russians
and white Russians, but I've never known a yellow Russian."
Yeah,
right. Because he wouldn't. Yes, that's right. He couldn't bring himself to tell her in person. Yeah, yeah.
Well, but his motto was "Do it grandly." That was the motto for Condé Nast with their editors. But Psy could be quite icy about firing people, though.
They were spectacular firings, and some of it was.
Tell some of the firings,
I mean,
and they were like long-term, super successful, legendary editors, like Grace Mirabella. William Shawn was sort of a firing.
Shoved out. I mean, Grace
and Diana Vreeland. She's a legend.
Grace Mirabella found out that she had been the editor-in-chief of Vogue for, I think, about 17 years, and she finds out on the 5 o'clock news. Liz Smith is saying that Grace has been fired. Her husband sees it. He calls her in the office. She says, "Oh, that can't be true." That's how Anna Wintour took the job. And by the way, Anna, she actually spoke very frankly about this to some biographers, saying that this was one of the worst experiences of her life, and she was horrified. And she thought that Psy actually took a little kind of delight in the tabloid drama. And meanwhile, she felt that she'd been, unfairly caricatured as an Eve Harrington. So it's an interesting moment. Yeah.
Another funny thing was Psy's father, Sam, bought Vogue because his wife, Mitzi, who was like a 4'8", 80-pound, very vibrant life force, wanted Vogue or something. And the joke was that she had asked Psy to get her Vogue, and she meant go down to the newsstand.
Right. And he brought it back.
Bought it. So the question here is, what is going to happen to Vogue or Vanity Fair? How can they morph to survive?
Yeah,
thrive.
I'd be paid a little bit more money if I had the exact solution. But I guess I'd say this, the Vanity Fair Oscar party and the Vogue Met Gala especially, these are still like worldwide events. At the New York Times, I think we have like 20 people assigned to the Met Gala when it happens. Covering it, and people want to see who celebrities are there. So Vogue and Vanity Fair still mean something. I think they still stand for a certain establishment. So the question is, how do you sort of take that brand equity, to use a consulting term, and translate it to today's audience? I actually take some faith in Substack, the success of some Substacks, which I'm sure many people here subscribe to.
Yeah, and Tina's Substack is great.
Is excellent.
Excellent.
You should definitely subscribe to Tina's. But I'll say the ones that are most successful are the best edited and the best written. And so it gives me faith that, the written word still has some endurance left, and that people still want, a sharp sensibility. They still want someone curating the culture for them.
Yeah, I worked at Time in the early 80s, and I just thought, and I left to go to the New York Times in 83, and I thought Time has 1 or 2 years at most. And it's still around, and Newsweek's still around long after, But the question is, you can be around with the name, but really be a husk. So the question is, can these Condé Nast titles
come back?
Yeah.
Do we have a few minutes? I want to ask you a couple quick questions.
Well, if you guys can stay, I can answer.
You might know Maureen, who writes these fantastic profiles, and if you haven't read it, her book Notorious, which just came out as a collection of them, are fantastic. It includes one of my favorites of yours, which is your profile of Tina Fey that ran on the cover of Vanity Fair, which was...
Right, and that was Annie Leibovitz's photo that won Photo of the Year, I think.
And I think you got the scoop about the origin of her scar, if
I did.
Yeah. So my question is, you in your profiles, you usually play a game called Confirm or Deny with your subject, so I'm going to do a quick game of Confirm or Deny with Maureen. Confirm or...
Deny.
So confirm or deny, Tina Brown tried to hire you for The New Yorker.
Confirm. And Graydon tried to hire me for Vanity Fair. And, you know, I would have loved either of those jobs. Tina wanted me to cover, you know, the business of Hollywood and move to LA. I would have loved that job, and I would have loved to write for Vanity Fair. But, you know, when I was little, my favorite Aesop's fable was about the dog who had a steak in his mouth and passed by a river and saw the reflection of another dog with a steak in its mouth, which was him, and dropped his steak, thinking he could have both. So I'm always very cautious when I had the dream jobs, so I couldn't take the other two dream jobs. But didn't Tina say leaving The New Yorker was like the dumbest decision she made?
She did, maybe with...
She wanted equity, and equity is lifeblood to creators.
And by the way, you know, for all the expense, for all the coddling that Si Newhouse did of his editors, he never gave them a financial stake in the company. And in a lot of ways, giving these perks and these high salaries was a way to keep them. He always wanted the ultimate control. That was kind of how it worked. Okay, confirm or deny. You are on the short list to replace Anna Wintour as editor-in-chief of American Vogue.
No, anyone, Andre Leon Talley, one time he got sick and he had to stay with me. And he would keep saying before I left the house, he would go, "Can you please stop, take off that dress and iron it?" I mean, I was running around in a wrinkled dress, and I went to the opera, the Met, with him one time, and I was wearing, you know, a resale dress that I thought looked very elegant, and he looked me up and down, and he goes, "Ugh, Tulle, Blanche Dubois." So Andre would come back to life and stop that if anybody suggested that. Oh, and another time, he took me as his date to Obama's second inaugural brunch at the White House. And we're going to get in line to greet Michelle and Obama. And he looks down and he goes, "You never wear rag and bone booties to the White House."
We learned something tonight. One more confirm or deny. For a period, you wrote a pseudonymous advice column in Mademoiselle, the Condé Nast magazine.
Yes, and the biggest regret of my life is I never put one penny on my expense account because I didn't know that I was supposed to do it grandly. But I was working, I guess, was it at Time or at the New York Times, but I needed extra money to live in New York, so I would freelance all the time, and I agreed to do an advice column for young women. And, well, I was going to say, they asked me what I wanted to call it, so I wanted to name it after Becky Sharp in Thackeray's Vanity Fair, so I said Becky Sharp, but they had never heard of that, so they changed it to Rebecca Sharp, which made no sense at all. And I was giving really bad advice. It was when I was at Time, that now I remember, and I would use the guys at Time who were mean to me as examples of the office snake and the office underminer. And I would just try and tell them how to handle it, but I wasn't handling it well myself.
Well, I took the liberty of digging up some of your old columns.
Deny.
And I'll just share one sample. The column was called Your Brilliant Career.
Oh, yeah.
And there's some very good advice in here, actually. One bit I like, this is from March 1989, is you said, "I've always prided myself on never stooping to take part in office gossip, but you're making a mistake if you try to avoid it. You want to use it to your advantage."
Yeah, use gossip to your advantage.
And just briefly, one person wrote in to ask, can four-letter words deep six your career? There's a woman in my office who swears like a sailor, and all the guys seem in awe of her. Aren't most business people impressed by women who talk tough? And you quoted broadcast news with Holly Hunter, who screams at a subordinate who says, "I'll fry your fat ass," as the head of the network watches Rapley and remarks, "I had no idea she was this good." And you said, even if you can use profanity with panache, my advice is to avoid it in most office situations. A friend recalls he was once taken aside by a member of the board of directors who said, you're much too smart to be communicating with four-letter words. You wrote, and that, I concluded, was one hell of a good piece of advice.
Yeah, that was my mom's advice, too. All right, thank you, Michael. That was fun. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Maureen.